Welcome to the Cyber Business Podcast, where we feature top founders and entrepreneurs and share their inspiring stories. Now, let's get started with the show.
Matthew Connor here, host of the Cyber Business Podcast, where we feature successful business leaders, top law firms, green energy companies, and more. I'm very excited to introduce today's guest. He's been a great inspiration to me for years, a man whose business knowledge and acumen is a real joy to experience, the host of the Second Bite podcast, the founder of Potomac Business Capital, a true scholar and a gentleman, the always dapper Todd Taskey. Todd, welcome to the show.
Matthew, thank you for inviting me. I'm happy to be on with you.
Great having you. All right, before we get into today's episode, a quick word from our sponsors. Today's episode is brought to you by cyberlinks.com. That's cyberlynx.com. Cyberlinks is a complete technology solution provider that ensures your business has the most reliable and professional IT service and the only company that guarantees your safety and satisfaction. Hey, Todd, you work with private equity firms all the time, don't you?
Yeah, we do. As a matter of fact, we do transactions. We help our clients, which are typically businesses that are in the 1 to 3 million of EBITDA range. We help them do transactions, and oftentimes the buyer, most often, is a private equity backed company, and sometimes it's directly with private equity.
That perfect. Well, we had a private equity firm come to us recently because they'd been hacked. They went to their current provider who told them, "Hey, just change your passwords, you'll be fine." It turns out, surprisingly, after following that advice, they weren't fine. So they brought us in. We got them cleaned up within a couple of hours, got them all locked down, and they were good to go from that point forward. Interestingly, though, that this group they believe they were too small to be a target, but the reality is, just being connected to the internet makes everyone susceptible. So not having the right cybersecurity protections, kind of like going into public with a compromised immune system. At least that's what I tell people. It's not that you're being targeted, but that you might come in contact with something that can hurt you. At the same time, you can go out in public 1,000 times and never get so much as a cold, which often gives people a false sense of security. So what we do is we get our clients nice and healthy, then put them in a bubble, and then they can go out in public, aka the internet. They're nice and safe and they have nothing to worry about. So when it comes to security, an ounce of prevention really is worth a pound of cure. And if you're not sure if your business is 100% safe and secure from online threats, check out our website, cyberlinks.com, where you can find out about how to protect your company. And you can also sign up for a free dark web scan there. So without further ado, back to our show. Todd, thanks for coming on today. This been looking forward to this.
Yeah, me as well, Matt.
So for those that aren't familiar, the Second Bite podcast, and I'll get into what you do at Potomac Business Capital, but I am such a huge fan of the Second Bite podcast. It is quite literally my favorite podcast. It's fantastic.
That's great to hear.
I think anybody who is interested in business or who owns a business or is interested in investing in businesses, your podcast does such a wonderful job of bringing in clearly decades of experience and knowledge of how business works, how financing business works, how selling businesses works, and brings them into these. You get to be brought right into the conversation of how these deals are put together, how these deals are structured intelligently, things that nobody even thinks about, and your podcast brings you right in there. It's fantastic. I mean, it's a gem.
Yeah, thank you for that. We hear from people all the time how helpful it is to hear maybe, from an insider's perspective, but, the people that we work for and the people we have on the podcast, these are guys that have built a business and sold it for 8 or 10 or 12, 15, $20 million. So a meaningful sum of money, but not enough to land you on the cover of a magazine or propel yourself into space or run for president or something like that. So it seems like these guys and women are tangible examples of the direction I could move my business towards, number one, but it also gives people a really good view of how the buyer community thinks about the companies, right? And one of those, just to dovetail with what you were talking about, is, people do due diligence. They do what's known as a quality of earnings, and they also do due diligence. And due diligence includes your security measures and protocols, right? And an analogy I would use, for example, if somebody wanted to reach me, my email is Todd at Potomac Business Capital. But if I told you I was a professional and you can reach me at todd@gmail.com, you'd be like, that seems a little amateurish, right?
Yeah.
And the notion that somebody would be running around with a real business that doesn't have any cybersecurity protocols or protections is just a big question mark for people beyond, just being out in the world unprotected, as you were describing. At the end of the day, it's the return, the protection you get for the minimal cost it requires is so small, and you're not doing it. That makes me wonder about what else you're not doing.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. I had never really realized that, but yeah, that makes perfect sense. I mean,
And I'll tell you what, you had asked about private equity. The private equity world has, their antennas up pretty strongly, because there was, like, over the last 2 years, private equity, when they announce an acquisition, that new portfolio company gets attacked right away, ransomware attacks, because they finally have a big checkbook and deeper pockets. And there's a very small window of time. They announced the deal. We just got this closed last week. Today's Tuesday, whatever it might be. And so people go after them pretty quickly. And if they're not buttoned down in advance of that, obviously, in 21, it was a record payment collectively in ransomware. And I don't know, I'm quite certain not all of it was reported, because it's an embarrassing thing. But that kind of dovetail into some of our experience and what you're talking about.
Yeah, it's funny because people think that I think we talked about that one private equity firm thinking that they're too small. The reality is these let's say you're a hacker and you've come up with a way, you find a particular vulnerability, right? And you're like, oh great, this is one that I can go after. You don't go out and search for people with, like manually for that vulnerability, right? It's one thing if you're targeting, let's say, Target, right? Great. So you might go after Target or a few of these, targets, and fine, but it's kind of hard. So what they do is they program bots to run out, or they'll set up traps for people to come, to kind of stumble into. But these bots go out and they search the internet, every IP address, and they look for this vulnerability. And when they find it, like, oh great, boom. Then an actual human gets on the line, if you will, and does the work, right? And there's a lot of different techniques involved, but a lot of it isn't really spear phishing, where they're going after that particular one. So it's, kind of that immune system of you're out there and you're stumbling around and now you've come in contact with it. Yep. Nobody was searching for you with, germs and then coughed in your face. You just happened to stumble upon the germs. But, now to your point, there is also that spear phishing. So you might have been a little fish and you stayed in the right parts of the pond and you were nice and safe. But then you got with, you did this deal and it got announced and it's like, oh, hey, now you're in the spotlight. You're a big fish. You're a big target, and you're easy prey.
It would seem like locking your front door is a better strategy than hoping somebody never tries to walk through your front door. Right.
Absolutely. That's exactly right. Yep. Love it. So, talking about your podcast, which again, fantastic. So do you just, have private equity guys on there? Is it business owners? How do you go about that? Because
so it's we have a lot of great people on there. We talk about we have some past clients that have done transactions, and when we have hosts, and this is the other feedback we get, we get very granular in terms of what the buyer liked and didn't like. The mistakes that were made along the way, that you wish you could have corrected, the things that went really well, the things that you were surprised by, the things you wish you would have done differently. And so there's a lot of helpful hints in there, from that perspective. But we've had a bunch of private equity guys on there, and they talk about how they analyze companies that's just at a level 2, 3 above where most people are. And I think about private equity. They have a ton of money. They have smart people, and they do tons of analytics and tons of work before they acquire a business. There's no doubt in my mind why they're successful. And if you see the level of rigor, we'll do calls with a private equity backed company or a private equity group, and they'll ask a series of questions around a spreadsheet that they created for this call. And my clients be like, well, where the hell did you get all that? Where'd you get that from? They're like, oh, we ran some regression analysis based on your average length of customer and your average. And they're like, holy shit, really? Oh, you guys are doing that with what I sent you? Yeah, but it was in a PDF. Yeah, we can take the PDF apart and put it into a spreadsheet, and then we just ran some analysis. And it just blows their mind.
Yeah.
At the level of detail. We're working on a project right now, and a bunch of people, and this is one of the things when you go through a process, you hear the same questions over and over and over again. And in this particular case, what's retention like? What are your verticals like? How long are you keeping these amount of clients? Because some of the math's not quite adding up. And so when my client was going through it, he said, I'll get it to you tomorrow. That was Tuesday. He called me today and said, wow, we started exploring this. And we got a whole bunch of old, small people that all we're doing is hosting their websites for. And so that's bringing our average way down. It's bringing our retention up probably a little bit more than it should. But that's not really what people are buying for in the business. So it caused them to just think a lot about the analytics of their business, which, as everybody listening to this would know, that's hard to do when you're running a business, you're head of sales, you're hiring, you're managing customers, you're dealing with problems, right? There's only so many hours in a day.
That's right. No, that's a really good point. I mean, I think we all experience that, and having that extra hand. I mean, what a private equity firm can do like that, boy, that would be handy to have even once a month.
Oh yeah, I mean,
Imagine.
There's a couple. We have one guest on our podcast, Grayson LaFrenz is his name.
Yeah,
and so he had a company that's in San Diego. It's called Power Digital. He partnered about 4 years ago with a group in Chicago called Periscope Capital. They were 5 million of EBITDA. 3 years later, they were 30 million of EBITDA. They did 4 acquisitions, and then they sold that business for almost 20 times EBITDA to another private equity group called Court Square. And so Grayson was great, and that's why he's on a 2-part episode. Talked about the first transaction that they did, what they wanted from those partners, what those partners wanted from them. And one of the big questions is, are you reporting to private equity all the time? And he's like, let me tell you, I call those guys every week. I got this great idea. What do you think if we did this? And they would thoughtfully take my harebrained ideas and analyze them and come back and say, geez, you know what? That might work, or that won't work for these reasons, or whatever the case may be. And so that was a great success for all of them. And now they have a new private equity partner. They have a new chunk of capital, and they're, on the road to doing new transactions. This company right here, Social SEO, was a company that we partnered with, and we got a transaction for them 2019. And they finished that year right about 2 million of EBITDA. And they'll close this year, 2022, at 17 million of EBITDA. They've done 3 transactions. My clients are having a ball. They're doing better work for their customers. Their employees are happier because there's more opportunity for expansion and growth and all these other kind of things.
Wow.
So that is what we get to do, is help entrepreneurs find great and compelling transactions that are more than, hey, I'm selling and I'm going to retire. And then when you get to, unpack those things and hear the real behind the scenes stories to them is the reason why, people seem to enjoy that podcast so much.
Well, okay. I want to talk about what the second bite actually means and kind of parlay that into what you were talking about here with that company. So for those that don't know, can you explain what the second bite is?
Yeah. So very typically, and for the folks at social SEO, and literally all these transactions are roughly the same. Client gets a cash at close, real cash at close, and then they retain some level of equity in the company. We did a couple of these deals earlier this year. One of my clients has 47%, the other one has 42% of the company in partnership with private equity. That will likely come down as they do acquisitions, and they'll have a smaller piece of a much larger pie. But, again, that one business is 8 times larger in 3 years. And I think my clients have their equity piece is about a third smaller. So, from that standpoint, I'll put it this way. And this is kind of the classic definition. So that multi-millions that I got at close, that's my first bite. And I also got equity. Now, the equity piece is tax-free. So typically, if you structure it properly, you won't have to pay tax on that roll forward, is what it's known. So then when that sells 3 or 5 or 7 years later, that is what your second bite is. And very typically, clients will sell 2/3 and roll forward 1/3. We've done it, as you heard, at 40% roll forward. We've done it at 15 or 20% roll forward, depending on what the client wants to accomplish. The hope is that 1/3 will be 2 or 3 times the size of the 2/3 upfront.
It's amazing. I mean, that's just so fantastic. And at least for me, I had never heard that of that before you, right? And I'm kind of curious, if I'm the only one who I think the general information out there about, oh, you start your own business, you sell it, and you're off to, whatever, the beach or whatever you want to do, and you even hear about these big transactions where the founders end up selling and okay, fine, they get a payout and then they go do something else. They're bought out of their company and that's it. But is this something that's new? Has it been around? Why is?
Yeah, great. It's interesting because I oftentimes hear from people, I didn't know you could do that.
Yeah.
Right. And so Grayson sold to private equity, sold to Periscope and took chips off the table. Then he sold to Court Square, took chips off the table. And so he's on now his third bite at the apple, which will probably be, I don't know, another 3 or 4 or 5 years out there. We just had the first part of the episode. The second part will be next week with Mike Mothner from W Promote, also out in California. Same thing he did with Shamrock. Got some in capital from Shamrock, took a little bit off the table, just did a nice transaction with the group ZMC out of New York City. Same thing. And so I think a lot of times people don't realize, as I always tell them, I think, can make a transaction better so that it's more compelling than remaining independent, number one. Number two, and I hear this all the time, the cash we get at close dramatically alters our risk profile. Because, I'm hoping to hit it big with the second bite. And I'm still flying commercial with the first bite, but I can feel pretty comfortable about my future and the kids going to college and probably my grandkids going to college, right? And again, private equity, it's really difficult for them to destroy value. So the part you roll forward, maybe it'll double, maybe it'll triple or quadruple, but it's pretty hard for it to go to zero. And so for a lot of the folks that we work with, they have more resources, more upside potential, and probably a higher risk tolerance because of the money that that they put in the bank. Yeah. So as I always tell clients, the reason that people do the transactions that we do is because we solve two problems for them. Problem number one is money, right? Do we get the right amount of value for what you've created in your business? And the answer is always yes to that. Otherwise, we wouldn't get a transaction done. Number two is a fill in the blank, though, Matt. And for some people, it is, we don't have I've never been able to build a good sales team here. We don't have access to the customers that we want to. We're not big enough that people take us seriously. We offer this service, but we don't offer this, and people like having both of them together, right? And it's the combination of getting capital, having a real smart partner, and solving that fill in the blank that is a compelling combination of things that people get excited about.
I mean, it sounds kind of ideal, honestly. I get excited about it and I'm like, I have no desire to, but then I hear it and I'm like, well, why don't you? Like, like that sounds like a really smart way to go about it. You should kind of, and I think that more people would if, when I started my business and I think a lot of people were the same way. They build a business that takes care of them and their family and, hopefully grows and makes them a comfortable living and maybe, takes care of their kids and hopefully their grandkids. Fine. And that's not, sure, that's challenging, but, I think, that the idea of private equity, and I don't know where this even comes from, is always like a it's got this negative connotation, which makes no sense. And I think is it that it gets lumped in with all these, the bad VC that you hear about, like, and I say bad VC, but how is it?
Yeah, I think it's a little bit that, but remember, you'll never read or hear about any of the deals I do.
Right.
They're not big enough. Typically, what you'll hear about is big private equity with big numbers doing big transactions. You'll read about it in the Wall Street Journal or wherever else. And a lot of those places can just do financial engineering, right? Which means we got to cut a lot of people. And we're people got to go back to work, and we're not doing this, we're not having free snacks, and we're not having a coffee thing in the office and all that kind of stuff. And so because of that, they get this negative connotation that they're greedy and they don't care about people and on and on. Over the last 10 or 15 years, private equity has gotten smaller and smaller in the type of transactions that they'll do. And when you buy or invest in a $2 million or a $3 million business, EBITDA, right? Earnings, it's your net earnings. When you buy a business like that, there is no financial engineering to do, right? Yeah. Typically, people have to build out more of an infrastructure. We need more people here, not less people here. We need to grow. We need opportunity. We need all that stuff. And so you're right. There's this big, very much so a negative connotation to, oh, I know what private equity is, and these guys are going to boss me around and on and on. When we did a social SEO deal, we did it with a group called Everlane Partners up in Boston. They're great. They didn't even have an operating agreement between the private equity group and it's interesting because our guys rolled forward a big chunk of money or a big chunk of equity, and people would say, well, geez, they need to be protected. And the private equity group has said, we just wrote these guys a multi-million-dollar check. I hope they show up on Monday. We don't know can't run this business, right? So this kind of mutual benefit is what works so well. And many, many private equity groups are really focused on accomplishing that. Yeah. Because private equity doesn't want to operate a digital marketing firm or an IT services firm or a cybersecurity firm or anything. What they want to do is take their knowledge and their money and their resources and turn that into something bigger. And almost always that something bigger is better for the end customer. Because if it's not better for the end customer, you got a bad business model. A bad business model doesn't work. That's right. So it's fun being part of that ecosystem.
Oh, no doubt. I mean, it's still fascinating. I mean, I don't know. I understand that, it makes sense with the big stories that make, but if small business is the backbone of the economy and most people work for a small business and and that there's so many out there, it's surprising to me that there aren't more second bite podcasts, putting this kind of information out there for other entrepreneurs to kind of consume and understand. You don't hear about it in business school. It's not, it wasn't, I didn't hear it this way, when I went through. And, it seems to be a missing link. And maybe is it a PR problem for private equity?
I think so. A couple of things. Number one, to be interesting or attractive for a transaction like that, you really need to have EBITDA, which is earnings before interest, taxes, amortization, and depreciation, which is kind of your net profit, right? Mm-hmm. And you can add back all the stuff, right? The car and the place at the beach and all the other stuff. You add that back into your EBITDA, but you got to be over $1 million or so. And so there's a lot of businesses that are smaller, number one. Number two, a lot of people, small business people, don't have a business. They have a job, right? Yeah. Like a person I met yesterday said, I'm thinking about selling my business, and she has an employment headhunting business for lawyers. And that's it. That's what she does. That's her job. There is no company. She's got an assistant, but there's nothing to sell there, right? Yeah. Lawyers are oftentimes, unless you're part of a big law firm, and that's why law firms have partners that buy in to buy out old partners, as opposed to those selling for significant chunks of money, right? Yeah. So personal service can be a little bit tricky, and that kind of stuff. So so that's probably why it's a little bit maybe of an undiscovered way for people to turn something that they have spent a long time building into something bigger and perhaps more exciting before they exit. And it's kind of a stop in the middle.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think having that the knowledge and idea of private equity coming in and being a partner to help, springboard the company to the next level, really help with growth. And yes, you got to reach a certain level, but I think if that were more common knowledge, then more businesses, I would have started mine with that in mind. I would have, from day one, that would have been, it would have been a goal. From there, it makes perfect sense. Why wouldn't you, when you know that that's an option and it's so much better? So build your business in this way, and then, bring on the financial and kind of the, beyond just financial intelligence, partner to help, with all those areas and help grow your company, and then get that first and second bite, maybe a third bite. That's ridiculous, right? Yeah. I think more businesses would start with that in mind if they knew that was an option that exists. But I think what keeps so many businesses small and a job is that, I mean, let's go back to that headhunter. If I'm a headhunter and I start my business because I'm good at that, right? But if I also know that, hey, look, I'm good at this, but if I bring in 5 other headhunters and we're good at this, and then we create this business, we create the model, something that works, that we can grow, and we get a couple million in EBITDA, and then we can bring in a private equity firm and really expand this thing out and be a powerhouse. That's a whole different world that I've stepped into.
Right. It's a completely different business. And, I tell, because a lot of times when I talk to people or get introduced to people, or they reach out, whatever it might be, I hear oftentimes, I'm not quite sure I'm ready to go do this yet. Right. And I'll often tell them, if we go, so when you engage a banker, when you work with somebody like me, you pay a small engagement fee, and then there's a success fee when the company sells. The engagement fee is by far the greatest consulting you could ever spend money on, because it's not me. It's guys with checkbooks that don't really care about your feelings, that are going to ask you very difficult questions and comment very bluntly about your business. And if you have 10 of those phone calls, you're going to hear over and over and over again the things that people don't like, or that diminishes value in their eyes about your company. So then you say to yourself or to your partner, so obviously we're not ready to go to market yet, but we sure know what we got to work on. And we're going to work hard for the next 2 or 3 years anyways. Let's focus on fixing these things, because the market's going to reward us for these things. or you just decide, I don't care. I'm not going to go get 5 other headhunters or whatever. But this is my job, right?
Yeah.
And so you manage a business differently when you say, this is what I do. This is it. And I'm going to be a one-man band versus I need to reinvest in the business and grow a staff and have an office and all that kind of stuff. So it's just but it forces people to come to a conclusion about who they are and what they want to do. And it brings tremendous clarity to what you're really doing.
Yeah. That's a great point. So we've talked about the Second Bite podcast, but we haven't really talked about your business, Potomac Business Capital. I mean, we kind of did. We hinted at it. So if you would give us the listeners, viewers, the rundown.
Yeah. So the quick rundown is that we help people with transactions. And the way that we view the world is that there's 2 types of transactions. There's the exit transaction, right? I don't want to do this anymore. I don't want to do anything anymore. So sell the business and get me as much as you can. That's a pretty direct assignment. And it's pretty simple because there's one measure: whoever offers the most amount of money, because I'm leaving, right? And we did one of those last year. I think we did 2 the year before, but it's less than 20% of the transactions we do. The majority are, like I was describing before, an evolutionary transaction. So somebody says, I'm not ready to retire or quit. We're at a certain point where we have a real business.
Mm-hmm.
But what are we doing, right? What's the next step forward? How do we grow? Where are we going to, and how can we get there? And what makes the most amount of sense for us? And a lot of people, as you know, have a big chunk of their net worth tied up in the business. So the fact that I can get some liquidity, the fact that I can get a good partner, the fact that I can add additional capability sets to what we're offering our clients is a better solution for them, and they enjoy doing that. So that's what we spend the majority of our time doing for people in that 1 million to, usually 4 million of EBITDA range, which means their revenue is somewhere typically 7 or 8 million up to 25 or 30 million.
Okay. And you guys do that for any industry, or what's your sweet spot? What do you guys specialize in?
Yeah, most of the business that we do is in the digital space, digital marketing, digital transformation. That's a pretty big umbrella. We also partner with a local group here in Columbia called 321 Capital, and they help me when there's something outside of my expertise. So we're working on a couple of transactions with them right now that are a little bit broader in the services, and one of them is actually in the restaurant restaurant equipment manufacturing and distribution business, which is not something I know really well. They know it a great deal. We got another company up in Canada that does they do services for oil companies, and they're global and they're all around the country. And there's a whole story behind this. My guys at 321 have a good deal of experience in that space as well. So we're working on that together.
Interesting. So when, let's say you're in that a restaurant equipment manufacturing space, and whether it's that or, any of we have clients all over, whether they're law firms or home health or whatnot. So I'm kind of thinking from their perspective, if you're, let's say, a law firm, does it make sense? Is there a point where private equity coming in makes sense, or, or is it, nah, it makes more sense in certain spaces?
It depends on the circumstance, and it depends on what the owner or the founders want to accomplish with their business. But we're certainly happy to chat with anybody that wants to explore the opportunity. So we're certainly available that way.
Fantastic. Well, makes a lot of sense. All right. So as we, I want to be respectful of your time, and as we go to wrap this up, before we do, I'd like to tell people where they can get in touch with you. The Second Bite podcast, they can get pretty much anywhere.
Yeah,
Is there a place you prefer them to go?
secondbytepodcast.com. You can go to secondbytepodcast.com, or wherever you podcast from, you can find it there. And then you can find me at PotomacBusinessCapital.com or on LinkedIn. I'm pretty available any of those places.
Fantastic. So, you always have the best, let's say, book recommendations, of anybody I know. Love yours the most. So I'm going to ask you if you wouldn't mind sharing a book recommendation with our listeners. Yeah, because you always have these great business books. I'm like, really? That's fantastic.
Yeah,
And then they become gems.
This will make me. I'm reading this right now. It's called The Dawn of Everything. See how big it is?
Yeah, that's a good one.
It's thick, and this is just, questioning the origins of the world and the planet that we live in. It's pretty interesting.
To be fair, it is about the dawn of everything. So it'd be weird if it was thin, right?
That would be weird.
The dawn of a couple things.
Yeah. So that is, that's what one of the books that I'm reading right now.
The Dawn of Everything. There you have it.
Yeah.
Well, Todd, it has been a real pleasure. I can't thank you enough for coming on. And
my pleasure. Good luck with this podcast, Matt. And thanks for all that you do for us.
Of course. Thanks, buddy.
Thanks for listening to the Cyber Business Podcast. We'll see you again next time, and be sure to click subscribe to get future episodes.